What's up everyone, Lance Hedrick here, and today we're going to look at the top 10 mistakes that I see people new to latte art constantly make. Alright, so today's video I'm actually going to break up into two. I'm going to talk about the first 5 mistakes that I see, and these are more on the, I guess, fundamental side. This refers more so to the makeup of what you're using, your milk and espresso and your cup. And then the next 5 I'll do in the next video, and those will be more on the technique itself. So they're both very important, and these are both things, like I say, I have to answer all the time from not only people new to latte art, but people who've been doing it for a while that are just forgetting some of the fundamentals. So we're going to break this up into 2 so that we can have 2 nice videos that you can reference. All right, now before continuing, I would like to mention something. My friends down at Slow Pour Supply, my shirt, these pictures, are wonderfully kind, and they are sponsoring these 2 videos. Slow Pour came onto the scene as kind of a milk jug distributor. They were focused on like the latte art side of things, but over time they have turned into every facet of coffee. They offer origami products and April products. They offer Time More products and a lot of other incredible things that I frequently actually use. I love the origami cups. I have an origami brewer and an April brewer at home. I've got a Time More scale at home, Time More grinder, all these different things you can get through Slow Pour Supply, as well as the pitchers that I use. Thank you so much, Slow Pour. I'm incredibly grateful for your support and for all this awesome rad gear. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about these first 5 points. The first thing we're going to look at, and of course I'm going to show you examples of what these mistakes are and how to correct them, but the first thing we're going to look at is how I frequently see people trying designs, but they have improper milk texture. The second thing we're going to talk about is how people are using inadequate espresso, and that's not to say that there's a certain espresso that's adequate, but to say that people aren't taking into account how they should treat their espresso, which we'll go over here momentarily. The third thing will be the speed of the pour, so the rate of your flow with the milk exiting the pitcher, going too fast, going too slow, and hitting that just right. The fourth thing we'll look at is going to be that spout proximity, how close the tip of your pitcher is to the surface of that liquid. So if you're too close, too far away, etc. And the last thing we're going to look at is a very, very simplistic one, which is your milk to cup ratio. So how much milk you're using for a specific drink. Let's get started with number 1, which is poor milk texture. All right. The number 1 rule is poor milk texture, or the number 1 mistake that I see is poor milk texture. So one thing I see is people steaming their milk and letting it sit, which is what I'm doing right now. And what's happening is that foam is starting to thicken, and then people start to pour. Or they're aerating the milk too late in the steaming process. When you aerate past the temperature where it's warm in your hand, there's going to be more bubbles that form, which is going to cause poor texture. So I'm going to give it a swirl because it has been sitting for a bit, but look, it looks like it's good milk, but in reality it's foaming up a lot. So you get something like this. You see how the milk's kind of sitting on top, and then you start pouring, and you see how thick it is, thick and clumpy? So we're going to take a look at this for just a second. As you see, this was all thick and completely disoriented. So once that first blob of foam came out, then we had better texture because we allowed that blob to come out. But if you steam too thick, which is what I did here, if you aerate too late, or if you let your pitcher just sit to the side, it's going to accumulate a lot of that foam. So on this, just make sure, on the number 1 mistake I see people do, ensure your milk texture is perfect. You want it to be glossy, you want it to be silky, and you want to pour immediately upon finishing your steam. If you wait at all, you need to swirl quite readily, quite heavily, and you want to minimize your tapping. The more you tap, the more the foam's going to shoot to the top. So if you tap, it's going to separate that. You want to swirl again. So never end on a tap. Only end on a swirl if you need to swirl. If you don't, I would recommend just going straight into the pour. So you want to ensure you're pouring right after steaming, and do not stretch too far after it's warm in your hand. If you do that, you're going to get a lot of bubbles, or you're going to get some separated texture. So this is mistake number 1 I see people making. All right, so the second mistake I see people do is using improper espresso. And what I mean by that, no espresso is improper, but you have to know how to deal with it. Do you see how chunky this espresso is. This is a Robusta espresso, okay? Really thick, chunky crema. What ideally you would do, you would swirl it until you saw those chunks kind of dissipate. Watch what happens. You see this? Look. You see all these chunks? Chunk, 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 chunk. It's very chunky. So the milk, when it was trying to come out softly and smoothly, it was really chunking around, all right? So you have this issue with Robusta and with really dark coffees that are really fresh. If you ever see this happen, it's not your fault. It's not the milk. Look, it's not the milk. The milk's good. It's the actual crema. You need to tap, tap, and swirl the mess out of that crema. Now, the opposite issue can be thin crema, in which case you may have a lot of channels or really old coffee. You would need to go fresher or ensure that you're decreasing your channels so that you have some crema. Crema is very important for latte art, obviously, but too much can cause issues like these clumpy clumps, okay? Clumpity clump clump. We're Professor Clump up in here, all right? Professor Clump in the hallway with a candlestick. So we don't want this. All right, I'm going to show you what we do want to do with something like Robusta. All right, so this is the proper way to deal with something with really thick crema. Again, this is Robusta. You see how chunky that is? It's almost like a film layer is on top. You're going to take this, you're going to swirl it. And essentially what you're doing is you're breaking that crema apart, you're forcing the surfactants off of those CO2 bubbles, and you're allowing them to dissipate. Now look, that oily top is gone. So I'm going to swirl my milk since it's been sitting. Tap, tap, swirl, always end on a swirl, and then here we go. All right, still a little, this is just going to happen with Robusta. Still have a little bit of shaky around the edges, but overall, look at the improvement from this. All from a simple tap, tap, and heavy swirl. We went from this to this. So if you're struggling with those clumps from fresh espresso, from really dark roasted coffee, or from Robusta, just know you got to tap, tap, swirl, swirl, swirl. All right, that's mistake number 2. So the third thing I see is people with improper flow rates from their pitcher. They're going too fast or too slow. Now remember, if you go too fast, you're going to release a lot of foam and it's not going to want to sit on top. If you go too slow, you're not going to get much foam at all. So that's what we're going to look at. So people will lay a base really nicely, then they stop and they come in really fast. See that? That's what happens when you go in too fast. It completely warps the design. You're going so fast that you have a lot of sinkage and beiging out, okay? And you need to be more finesse when you're coming into it because it blew out the edge. It wasn't able to hold its shape. It went at inconsistent speeds with the foam, and you have all this beiging that went on. So while we did get a heart, the issue there is that the pour was much too quick. So you completely ruined any chance at setting up a nice design. You need to be able to pour fast enough for that foam to come out, but slow enough to still control the edges of your shape. So you have to find that nice middle area, which I'm about to show you right now. So we're going to do it something like this. Lay the base. I'm going to start here, and we're just going to let the viscosity dictate for us how fast we pour. All right, and there we have our heart, as opposed to Mr. Too Fast. All right, so you see this? We still have the same texture, but we made it a much slower pour in comparison to this. Now, if we went too slow, the foam would be sticking on the inside here, and you wouldn't really be getting a shape at all. So you want to ensure that you are allowing the foam to come out at a higher flow rate in order to make that design fill the cup and to get the shape that you're wanting without blowing out the edges and without beiging too much. All right? And that's mistake number 3. All right, mistake number 4 is people who don't understand and still don't understand spout proximity. Okay? So going too high, going too close, both of those can be an issue. I'm going to demonstrate the most common thing that I see with spout proximity. So people will say, well, I'm tilting the cup all the way. But what they'll do is they'll drop in near the back. So if I come near the back, look how high that is off the ground as opposed to back here. So I'm laying my base, and then I'm going to come here. You see that? So what happened here is the milk sort of broke through and then it beiged out a lot. And it's because we didn't have that spout right on the surface. And when I did the second drop and I still didn't have it near the surface, you saw what happened. Initially the foam didn't come out, and then it did. And then because I was so high off of the surface, it started to sink that heart prematurely. And that's why we have the heart up here and sunk. Because the higher you come up while you're maintaining flow rate, the more of an angle that flow is going to give, right? So the closer we are, the less drastic that flow rate coming out is going to be. If we're here, as opposed to here, you see the difference in the angle of that milk escaping? So you want to ensure that your spout proximity is close. So when you're starting your pour, get closer and back to the lip so that you're able to more gingerly place the foam on top. And I'm going to show you what I mean right now. All right, so this is what you should be doing with spout proximity. You want to lay your base, and then instead of coming back here where your spout's high, you want to come here where it's really close. You see that? See how close I am? Look, and I'm still close. That whole way I was really close. And you see how I have centered because I increased my speed in order to push the design out in the cup. And I was really close, which allowed or disallowed a lot of that beiging to occur. So here's the other one. You see all this beiging between my first break and when the white actually took. And you see the more beige that came in because it was sinking from how high I was above the cup. And this, it's perfectly white all the way through. And that's because I had close spout proximity the whole way. So mistake number 4 I frequently see are people, they are holding the pitcher too high, scared to tilt their cup. You've got to tilt the cup and get that spout with a little Belgian dip on it. You want it all the way up in there, all right? Not up here, as close as possible, all right? All right, so we're going to move on to number 5. So another thing that I see you crazy cats doing is having way too much milk in a pitcher like this. Way more than your cup can even handle. And you're trying to pour, and that's not going to work. You need to have the perfect ratio from your milk to your cup. But watch what happens. I don't have much control at all. The foam displacement's going to be different. It's going to be hard to get as close as possible. All right, so look. Not a terrible pour, but mind you, I've been pouring for like 8 years. But as you can see, there's not a lot of contrast in that base. And you see how it's really wobbly around the edges. Now the reason for that, look how much milk is left in my pitcher. Look at that. I could pour a whole other cappuccino with that. The reason is because I'm not able to get close when I have it this full. Think about that. If it's this full, that's as much as I can tilt it. You see that? When it's this full, that's as much as I can tilt it before it starts coming out. If it's this full, look how much I can tilt it before it starts coming out. See that? So I can have closer spout proximity, the less milk is in my pitcher. Now remember the rule that I've always taught, which is 30 to 40% of your milk jug's capacity is all the milk you should put in there, all the cold milk you should put in there. All right. Now you can transfer to a bigger pitcher if you want to steam, if you want to use a bigger pitcher for something this small, but you would need to steam in this smaller pitcher. Okay. Now, do not. The other thing that I see people do is using a pitcher this size, properly distributing the milk in it, and then trying to pour latte art in a cup that's 2 times as big. That's also an issue. You need to pour the proper size cup with the proper size pitcher, period. So this is what it looks like when you have the proper ration of milk pouring the same exact design so you can see the difference. Laying the base and ripples. And ripples. All right, so let's take a look at that versus the first one. You see the difference in the contrast in the base? Now I know this has been sitting, but if you remember, we had all of that wonkiness around the edge. We had the beiging going on. Now my caffeine is kicking in, so I was wonky here, but that was not due to milk portioning. But as you can see, we have these nice dark brown. We see how dark of the brown we were able to wrap into the base, and we didn't have the washed out edge. Again, it is a little wonky. My caffeine's kicking in, apologies. But you see here, more wonky, and it's because we had a lot more milk and we weren't able to control the flow of the foam as much. So that's the final mistake of this part 1. We'll go 6 through 10 on the next. All right, so those are the first 5 of my 10 identified mistakes that beginner latte artists make. So make sure to go through those. I have time cues below so that you can go directly to whatever one you might be struggling with and give that a look. Thanks again to Slow Pour for sponsoring this. Hit that subscribe button. That would be incredibly helpful for me. Give the video a like. Follow me on my Instagram. It's just my name, Lance Hedrick. And if you really enjoy my content and want to support, I have a Patreon linked in the caption below. It would be incredible if you wanted to join the community we have going there. Anyway, keep your eyes peeled for part 2, which will come out soon on numbers 6 through 10 of the biggest mistakes I see with beginner latte art. And until then, we got our finger guns and our silky milky. So peace out, friends, and see you on the flippity flop.